And again, welcome to the AIE Saturday Seminar on Publishing Savvy. We're going to go ahead and get started with Miss Kenna. I'm going to mute myself and let her introduce herself.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is Kenna Sosa, and as Desiree mentioned, we've known each other quite a while. We went through the Library Media Specialist program together. I am a school librarian, and I'm an emerging author, and I'm very, very happy to share what I have learned recently with you. I've been writing for many years now, mostly in the travel fields and in magazines and doing book reviews. But I've decided to put my writing where my passion is, which is with children's literature. Ray Antonio and Raphael is my first book. It came out last summer, and I have 2 contracts coming up, one with a middle grade novel that we'll talk about in a minute, and also a third one with a publisher out of Louisiana. So I'm so happy to see so many of you are from Louisiana. You'll probably be hearing a lot more from me from Louisiana very soon. My first book, Ray Antonio and Raphael, is a bilingual picture book. It's set in the biggest annual celebration from my hometown, San Antonio, Texas, and it's a sibling rivalry story about 2 brothers battling it out to see who is going to be King Antonio, who is the basically king of the city during that 10-day fiesta period. And both brothers are vying for this spot, their fate to be decided by a single wave of a silvery, shiny glove. And if you're interested in that story, the book is available at barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, and through me as well. I'm starting to go out to schools and out to libraries and doing lots of promotional events, so hopefully I'll get to meet some of you very soon. So if you are interested in joining me in this journey and becoming an author yourself, I'm very happy to share what I have learned this year with you. So we'll go ahead and get started, and as Desiree mentioned again, if you have questions, go ahead and throw them into the chat and we'll try to address them if I don't address them through the presentation itself. One way to get started, I know when we're starting to write, of course we're sitting in front of a blank page, we're sitting in front of a computer screen, and the lightning just hasn't struck. There's a big difference between creative writing and informational writing. I can sit down and whip out articles like nothing. I do it all the time because it doesn't require my heart necessarily to be put into it. If you're looking to write creatively, your heart has to be in it. That lightning has to strike you. But that doesn't mean while you're sitting in front of the blank page that you can't do anything to begin to encourage that lightning to strike you. The easiest way to do that is to start with your characters. When I instruct children how to write in the library, and when I'm writing myself, I always follow the same procedure. You've got to get your story elements set first. Who your characters are going to be, what your setting will be, what's the plot, how is your story going to end. If you sit down and blindly start writing, you're going to find that you're going to have to edit at the end just as much as you had writing because you didn't have your focus. So for kids and adult writers, I recommend just sitting down and deciding what are these very, very basic details going to be, and the rest you can build from there. So I like to start with characters because I think characters guide your story. You can't write the same story featuring 2 very different protagonists. Your story is going to have to be different because they're different people. One way I like to do it is by people watching. So I sit down and I watch people. There are lots of great places for people watching. You can do it in the mall, at Starbucks, at a park. But what I mean is to watch, observe their behaviors. What are they doing? Why are they doing what they're doing? How are they reacting to things? How do you think they feel right now, and why might they feel that way? Notice if they have any quirks, any eccentric things that they're doing. All of these things build character. Good example, if you're noticing someone picking up pennies off of the street, but they don't appear to be a person who would need those pennies. Why would this person be picking up pennies off the street? What's their motivation? Could they be raising funds for a sick relative? Is it a compulsion that they can't help? All of these things will drive your story. Another way I like to come up with characters is by thinking like a kid. If I'm writing for kids, I need to think like a kid, right? So I ask myself, what do kids think their problems are, right? Good example, I'm driving along in my car and I've got my two kids in the back, and my idea is that I need to focus on the road and I need to make sure that I'm driving safely, whereas my son's idea of what's important might be, hey, tie my shoe. Hey, do you have some water, Mommy? Or my brother looked at me funny. All of these different things, of course, are the priorities of children. So you want to write a story that's focused on what a child would think is important, what a child might be focused on at the time. Not necessarily what we as adults would be noticing, but what the children would be thinking, because they are the ones driving our story. So, another thing you can do, especially if you are around kids a lot, what questions do kids ask? What makes you think? What makes you smile? What makes you cry? So, like I mentioned, I have two children at home, my 6-year-old son and my 8-year-old son, and I do get a lot of ideas from them. My 6-year-old asks a lot of questions, and what I noticed is he asks a lot of questions that I don't know the answers to, so I have to learn. I have to delve into his mind and try to find out for myself and for him. He asked me the other day, did John Harrington, one of the people who developed the modern toilet, have a dog? I have no idea. We had to try to look up some information to see what is the story behind this. That was what was important to him about it. What makes you smile? My son the other day asked me if I would be his henchman, believe it or not, and I laughed out loud. But that is a great story. What would be the dirty tasks that my child would ask me to do? He might think it's great to be my boss for a day, and that might make for a really great story. What has he asked me that's made me cry? Well, when kids are learning about family members, he asked me once, where is my grandmother? Well, that's another story. It might be a sad story, but it's an entirely new story, and you can pull all these details and these ideas from the honest mouths of children themselves. When you're developing your characters, you do want to make sure that you are avoiding stereotypes and cliches. Why? Because we don't want to influence somebody in a negative way if they're unfamiliar with characters from certain backgrounds, from certain cultures. We want to make sure that we're looking at our characters as whole, well-rounded people. Just because we come from a certain background, etc., we are not going to necessarily represent what some people might think we represent. We want to be looked at as individuals, and that goes into literature as well. You want to create somebody unpredictable, somebody that you can't necessarily guess what they're going to do next, because that'll keep readers engaged and excited, and to get them to continue reading that story all the way to the end. This is key. The protagonist of your story, you want to make sure is a child themselves, and typically a child of the demographic that you are shooting for. Okay, so if I'm writing a picture book for 6 to 8-year-olds, I want to make sure that my protagonist is somewhere around that demographic so that the readers can identify with that child and believe that they're part of the story as well. That doesn't mean we don't have adult characters in children's literature. It just means that the adult shouldn't be the focus. The child should be the one driving the story, guiding the story, being the leader and the hero of the story. So, once you've sat down, you've gathered some great ideas for characters. You can even pool some of these different quirks you've picked from people into one mega super interesting character. But you want to know first who you're writing about, what they would do in a given situation. So moving on to the plot. Once you've decided who your character is, and some of that's going to determine what your setting will be, and vice versa, you want to figure out, okay, now that I know this character really well, what is my story going to be about? What is going to happen with this character? And again, whether you're a child writer, whether you're an adult, you want to map this out first. You want to know where your story is going. If you don't, you're going to get lost along the way. Excuse me. So when you're writing, make those notes, imagine, explore, sketch out some different ideas. If character A was at the zoo, what might happen there? If character B was in a hospital, why are they in the hospital? What is going to happen? Regardless of what you choose as your problem or your plot, you want to make sure that you stay in that child's mind from a child's point of view. A big mistake that gets pointed out a lot with people who are beginning to write children's literature is that most of us, most of us, including myself, we begin by writing biographically, so we're thinking from an adult's point of view. You need to get back into the mind of a child. What would a child notice about this setting? How would a child feel in this setting? What would they understand from a certain setting that we may understand as adults, but they take in a different way? So make sure you stay in the child's mindset. Make sure that you have a beginning, middle, and end to your story. This, when you're guiding student writers, you want to be very careful with, because when we map out our story, we know the beginning, we know the end, and where they get lost is in the middle. So if you're teaching students to write, you want to question them to pull out all those details. A lot of times when I'm writing with kindergartners, I notice we map out our story, and then the story is solved from one sentence to the next. And you have to really pull those details and interrogate them to get the story to flesh out and to flow. And the same thing kind of happens to us as adults. If my story is that I have a dog that got lost, I can't solve the problem by walking to the park and there's the dog. Okay, if I know the dog is at the park, the dog's not lost. You have to guide your reader along that journey through the details with the ups and downs and the twists and the turns. So make sure you have a thick middle to that story that keeps your readers engaged. What would keep your story going and keep it exciting? Then make sure that your vocabulary in your story is going to be appropriate for a target age group. Okay, you're not going to, write about a political protest necessarily for a 5-year-old child. You want to make sure that your subject matter, your vocabulary is appropriate for that target age group. Another key point when we write, and this is something that even I've struggled with, show, don't tell. The second book I'm writing right now is a middle grade novel, and I'm still getting the same feedback from my editor as we work through it, is the use of passive voice. It's very, very common, especially in a lot of articles that I write. I'm trying to make a word count, so I'll go to that passive voice. I can beef that up. I can beef up my word count a lot easier with passive voice than I can with active voice. It's a bad habit in creative writing. You want to make sure you're using active voice. What I mean by that is you don't want your subject to receive an action. You want them to be in the action, right? You don't want to say, my heart was broken into many, many pieces. You want to say, he shattered my heart. So you have someone that's concrete there, performing a concrete, exciting, emotional action to something else, instead of something that simply happens to you. You want to show and demonstrate, not simply tell. And this really, it's a hard thing to do, because you do have to go back and you have to revisit every sentence that you wrote to make sure that all of them are written in this impactful, action-packed, active voice. And if you have questions on that, we'll touch on that again in a little bit. Make sure that in your plot, the child, as I mentioned before, is the protagonist. The child must be the one solving their problem in children's literature, not the adult. We have to be very careful with the adult characters that they stay kind of within their boundaries, because what we see a lot is an adult kind of telling the child, you have this problem, here's your solution. That doesn't work in children's literature. We want the children to figure out how to fix their problem on their own. An adult can be a helper, they can be a good influence, but the child needs to be the hero of their own story. The problem with allowing the adult to solve it is a lot of times it becomes preachy and it becomes more of a lesson. And we're not writing fables. That's already been done. We're writing stories about children for children. So the child needs to be the one that figures it out one way or another, with or without help. The adults are more like the supporting cast of the show. The child is the star of the show. We want to make sure that they figure out how this story is driven, and that keeps your child readers interested. All right, so when you figured out what your story is going to be about, you want to go through it, see if there are any holes in your story. Like I mentioned before, if the dog's lost and you just instantly know the dog is in the park, that's a big hole in the story. How did you know that? Your dog wasn't really lost if you knew that. So make sure your story makes sense. Does it have a clear beginning, middle, end? Is it clear how events happened, the sequence in which they happened, or is it confusing? Did I forget to put a step into my solution that will guide my child protagonist there? Did I contradict something that I did earlier on in the story? And then you want to make sure that it's age appropriate, and I don't mean necessarily subject matter. Children's literature today is filled with very emotional issues because these are real issues for children growing up today. You find children's literature on divorce, on abuse, on emotional problems, on bullies, on pretty much any subject you can think of. What I mean by appropriateness is, can the child follow the plot? Can the child go along with this plot and know where the story is going and not get lost? So a subject matter, being a more adult subject matter, can still be in a children's story as long as it is told and addressed in a way that a child of your key target demographic can understand. All right, so let's say you've decided all of your story elements now. You've picked your incredible, amazing, fascinating characters, usually more than one because you want to keep that interest going. You've decided what your setting is going to be, so you know what fantastic story place your story will take place in and what time. Don't forget that setting also includes whether this is a story from the past, present, or future. Your plot, you know what's going to happen in your story and how it's going to happen, and it makes sense and it's engaging and it's exciting. So now is when you sit down and you write that story out. You know where it's going, you know how to get there. Get that first draft down on paper. Different people do it different ways, of course. I prefer to write it on paper first so that when I type it up, I'm editing as I go because I'm catching these little things that I hand wrote out that don't really work with my story before I ever put it into the computer. But that's all up to you, what you're most comfortable with. But this is your time to really flesh it out, be passionate about it. It's much easier for that lightning to strike if you've got a lightning rod in your hand showing it where to go. So, once you've written it out, we need to edit. Editing is so important. As a writer, to be honest, I hate editing. It's really what I enjoy least about being an author and a writer. I like that lightning to strike, and I want my soul to pour out on that paper and to just share what my soul wants to communicate to readers, to the world. Editing is not my cup of tea, but it is absolutely necessary to a writer. Editing can be the key to getting a piece, whether it's an article, a book review, an interview, or a story. Editing is the key to make your work professional and publishable, regardless of the publishing stem that you choose, regardless of whether you are self-publishing, print-on-demand publishing, or if you're doing the traditional route. Editing is key. Your editor is not actually your editor. They are, you are your first editor. The editor's job is to go back and to ensure that your story or your article is the most well-written article or story it can possibly be. But it is your job as the writer to first ensure that it is even ready to be presented to an editor. This is one of the first ways that your story gets kind of put into the slush pile, as they call it, which basically means they're not even going to read it. And we'll get to that more in just a minute. Editing, so important. Editing is going to be kind of different depending on what you're writing. If you are doing creative writing, you're going to be looking for different things than if you're doing nonfiction. So I'm going to hit on nonfiction, because we haven't talked about that first, and because I do think it's actually simpler. If you're doing a nonfiction piece, so it could be a nonfiction book for children, it could be an article, make sure, first of all, that you have taken note of where all of your information has come from. In this day and age, plagiarism, my goodness, can get caught and get you in trouble within seconds. Okay, it's going to be so obvious where your information came from. So you need to make sure you're following guidelines for copyrights, fair use, that you are writing things in your own words. Make sure that there's no way, shape, or form anybody can accuse you of plagiarism at all. There should be no doubt in a reader's mind that this is information that came from your mouth onto the page. So make sure, depending on what you're writing, that you have a bibliography or your sources cited at the end of your manuscript or your articles. You must make sure that you've told where your information has come from, not only to protect yourself against plagiarism, but also so that your readers can see that you are a credible source of information. You know what you are talking about because you got your information from credible sources. So when you're writing out your bibliography, it should be pretty easy to tell if you're using credible, reliable sources, or if you found some information on the internet and just went with it. When I talk to student writers about writing nonfiction, I always tell them when they're using online sources to make sure that they've looked at the author's purpose. The author, creator of that website, are they trying to sell you? Sure that they're trying to tell you something, convey information, not sell you something, because what they're telling you will be drastically different depending on their motive. So make sure anything you gather, that they are credible sources that are trying to share information, that there's no ulterior motives involved that can be questionable. And cite those sources. This is where I got my great, fascinating information for you to learn from. If you're using names or organizations of real people, make sure that you have checked that you are using the names or representations appropriately. If you need any kind of permission to use those names or information, make sure that you've got it. Make sure you've gone through the proper procedures, that you've contacted them, and can be absolutely sure that this is all right, especially when you're talking about people who are still alive. Make sure, again, that you are not violating copyrights, and fact check. Because I find one fact in a certain resource, if it's listed somewhere else differently, you want to make sure that you've got the correct information. And if you're using resources that are older, for example, I know science is supposed to be science and fact forever, but things change and new developments happen. Textbooks from when I was a kid said Pluto is a planet. We no longer say that. So again, fact check those sources for nonfiction writing. And when you're writing nonfiction, unless the publisher or your venue for your writing calls for it, make sure that your own opinions aren't thrown into the subject matter, because you're not writing nonfiction to influence. You're writing nonfiction to educate. So look at the purpose of your writing, and if you notice, I've thrown my own opinions in here, my own beliefs in here. Unless the situation or your publisher calls for it, you want to make sure that you're conveying the information and not trying to sway someone in a certain direction. That's entirely different audience. So, editing, when it comes to creative writing, the best thing you can do, I tell this to students and adults alike, read that story out loud. Okay, read it as if you are performing it. Read it as if there's an audience in front of you, even if there's not. And we are doing this for a reason. I always tell the kids, you are not done writing until you have read it out loud, because you will find your own mistakes. And don't you want to find those mistakes before your teacher does? Me as an author, don't I want to find my own mistakes before my editor does? Oh yes, I do. I don't want them to find the silly mistakes that I overlooked. I want to give them my best possible face that first draft that I turn in. As you're reading aloud, you're going to notice how readability is in your story. And by readability, I mean, does it flow? Are some of my sentences way too long and convoluted and confusing, and I don't even remember what was at the beginning of the sentence by the time I get to the end? Are all my sentences too short and choppy? Does it sound awkward? Does my dialogue sound realistic and fun and continue to push the story forward, or is it filler? When you read the story out loud, you're going to notice these things. So first, read it out loud to yourself or in front of someone you're comfortable in front of, because that's the first time you are going to catch some of these little glitches in the writing. So, did you catch some of your mistakes? If you do, go back and fix them. I will say, as an author, editing is so heart-wrenching because you really do put so much of yourself into this story. And it's just like when you're a kid and you're that straight A student, you submit your paper to the teacher and you get it back bleeding with red ink. And it breaks your heart because you want to think, I did my absolute best and obviously wasn't that good. That's not the case with editing. Editing is to make it better. It doesn't mean what you did at first was not good. It means you're trying to make it the best it can be. So grow that thick skin, fix those mistakes, because if you caught it, your reader will catch it, your editor will really catch it. You want to make sure that you are not offering any chance to find simple grammatical mistakes. The dialogue. Like I said, dialogue, if you're going to use it, should drive that story forward. Okay, yes, you can have a hello, how are you doing today, Miss Smith? But you don't want to fill a story with that. Okay, especially in children's writing, it is so short and concise that anything you put in there in dialogue should convey action. It should be part of the story that moves. I'm sorry, my computer just logged me out. All right. One thing, and I noticed this writing my most recent book in the editing process with my editor, he pointed out a sentence in which he asked, does the protagonist know too much? I'm not so sure that a 10-year-old girl would be able to make this inference or jump to this conclusion that you wrote here. It almost seems too mature. All of us as adults, we're writing for children. Sometimes we forget that as a 10-year-old child, I probably wouldn't have noticed this or understood this in the same way. I'm projecting what I understand from hindsight onto this character. So you want to go back, read through, make sure that your character is behaving as a character would of that age. Is it exciting to write? Student writers, adult writers, is this exciting to you to write? If it is not, it will not be exciting to read. I can't express that any more importantly. If you are bored writing your story, this is either not the right story for you. It could be a great story that's more appropriate for a different author, or this is not the way you want your story to go. Okay? If you're bored while you're writing, your reader is going to be bored and your editor is not going to take a second look. If you read it and you are drowsing off, if you're getting lost within your own story, then you need to go back and you need to do a rewrite. Okay? There's nothing wrong with rewriting. You want to make sure that you have fixed all the little glitches, you filled all those nooks and crannies before you have shared it with someone else. Okay? If you rewrite it, so what? When you talk with authors, a lot of authors are going to tell you they have stories in drawers that have been in drawers for years. Why? It's not because it's a bad story. It's because something just isn't working just yet. And maybe some point down the road, I'll learn something new, I'll think of a new angle, and that lightning will restrike me and it will get fixed and it'll work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You cannot force a story to work. What you can do is rewrite, or you can put it away and start writing something new. All authors are going to tell you they have multiple stories going on at different times. Sometimes it's just the idea for a story. Sometimes you are in the third draft of a novel while you're starting your first draft of a picture book. One thing I do to keep all those ideas straight so I won't forget, because the lightning could strike me on idea J while I'm still working on draft B, I keep a file or a notebook that I call one-liners, and I just dash that little idea down. It could be as simple as a name of a character, a name that I just fell in love with that I have to use. It could be that quirk about the person picking up pennies. Whatever it is that inspired me, even if I haven't worked it all out, I write it down in that one-line file to where I can refer back to it. And what I found a lot of the time is a lot of those tiny little ideas end up fitting together, and I can put a lot of them together in a great masterful story. So again, if it's not exciting to write, it's not exciting to read, it's not working yet. So rewrite or go back to it later. Alright, so now you have edited, you're pretty sure this story is ready to go somewhere. What are you going to do now? Well, especially as a new author, you want to give this the best chance possible. You've used your knowledge at this point to go through, to edit, to get it the best it can be, in your opinion. It's always a great idea to get another set of eyes on it, okay? And I don't mean your editor, I mean a qualified critic. A lot of times people will say, well, I read this story to my kids, I read it to my mom, I read it to my friends, and they loved it. You have to keep in mind, your children, your mother, and your friends, they don't want to hurt your feelings. So while they're saying could be very true, it could be a brilliant story, you can't really be sure, because even if it's not a brilliant story, they're going to tell you they love it because they love you. No matter what I do, my mother will tell me that it's wonderful and perfect because she's my mother. And I say, thank you, Mom. And then in the back of my head, I say, let me get a second opinion from somebody who's in the business that's going to tell me if it's terrible. So, yes, you can share your work with friends and family, but just keep in mind, they may not have the background information, they may not have the experience to give you a qualified opinion on that story. They shouldn't be your only critics. A great place to find critiques that are free is through the SCBWI. And if you're not familiar, that stands for the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. This is a nationwide organization. You can become a member whether you're published or not. That doesn't matter. And there are many, many chapters. I'm a member of the North Texas chapter, and I cannot emphasize enough how important this organization has been in my growth as a first-time author. SCBWI in the North Texas chapter, they do monthly critiques. So you get together as a group. You sit with usually an experienced published author there with your group. You share your stories, and everybody gives their opinion on, well, it might be better if you tried this, or this part doesn't quite flow well, let's try this. But you're there with peers who typically do, even if they're not published, have a lot of information and a pretty educated idea of what it should look like to share with you. I met my mentoring author, Jan Peck, through a critique group there, who has just been immensely helpful. You're going to find that through that organization you meet a lot of people that you will need in the future networking, and they have that spirit of giving to help you, and hopefully you will return that in the future. Another great thing about this organization is that they host webinars. They also have conferences. They do many, many events, and sometimes these events are key in getting published. At their events, they invite editors, they invite publishers, and sometimes going to this conference is the only way you're going to be able to hand your story, your manuscript, to this editor or publisher, jumping over an agent, jumping over the slush pile, jumping over any other hurdles that would normally be in your way. And there are authors who have gotten their story out there and published by attending and participating in these events. So, published or not, I highly recommend looking into the events from SCBWI in order to really give a jump start to your career. They do plenty of things for illustrators as well if you're interested in that path. Another thing you can do is use a writing partner. Find another author or potential author and work together helping each other out, because they might catch something with a fresh pair of eyes that you didn't, and vice versa. And then you have someone you can collaborate with in the future. It could be anything. Collaborate in author visits with this other author. You could co-write a story, or you could just be helping each other with your individual work. But it is a great way to really help each other out. You can ask for a librarian or other book expert to take a look at your story and give their opinion on it. Educators, teachers love stories. Especially it's summertime, teachers are on vacation. If you know some teachers that teach the grade levels that you are directing your story at, ask them to look it over. And when they've read it, how would they feel about this as a read aloud to their class? Is this a story that they think they would read multiple times to their class, right? Or they could read it and say, you know what, it's filled with brilliant information, but you would have lost my student halfway through because it's just too long. They're going to tell you what works for their audience. And one thing you've got to know, the industry has changed. Books are expensive. So a lot of your target audience is going to be teachers and librarians, because librarians and schools still have the budget to buy books that a family at home might not. So please don't ignore these outlets, because they are going to be immensely important to you as an author. They are going to be the ones buying the books, and they're going to be the ones looking at these book reviews and really, really thoroughly examining what you're doing. So again, these are the people that you want to show your story to get it to the best manuscript it can be before submitting. Now, once you submit, the role of your editor. The editor wants this to be the best manuscript possible to give it the best chance of success. They are not necessarily looking to spare your feelings as much. They're doing this as their job, right? So the editor, even though they want you to be successful, they didn't pour their heart into this story like you did. So what they do may seem harsh. I have had an editor who really would have ripped me for anything in that story, and I obediently said, yes, yes, yes. I did what the editor asked me because I knew they're the boss. I'm doing my job. I'm complying. I may not agree, but they have expertise that I don't have, and I need to listen and learn. My most recent editor was completely the opposite. He was very positive, very encouraging. All the feedback he gave me was constructive criticism, and boy, did I want to please and do anything he suggested on that story to make it the best as possible. You don't know what you're going to get when it comes to an editor, and you don't have a choice on what you get when it comes to an editor. Your editor is chosen by the publisher, by your publishing venue, and your job is to go along and cooperate in a timely manner. A lot of this, just like, if you're in the Hollywood movie industry, is a hurry up and wait thing. Okay, if you have gotten a contract, if you are at that stage and you know this book is going to be published, how exciting for you. Be prepared to do some hurry up and wait. What typically happens is you get your contract, and then you, in your soul, you are just jumping up and down. I can't wait till this book is out. Please understand that this is a lengthy process. Ray Antonio and Rafael, I got the contract in the year 2011. It came out in the summer of 2015. It was supposed to take 2 years. You never know what's going to happen. Okay, you have delays. It could be editors being changed out. It could be the illustrator they had lined up suddenly isn't the illustrator anymore, and you've got to start from scratch. You never know what's going to happen between now and then. So although you have a contract, you have to understand it really does take that long. So in the meantime, keep writing. Write that next brilliant manuscript. So you're going to be waiting a long time, and then all of a sudden you are going to get an email contact from the editor saying, time to edit. And when it's time, they do expect you to be timely. They expect you to be on it. They want what they want changed, and they want it changed now, because now they're on their time frame. Okay, they are the experts. You got to do what they say. Now, if you do have something that you feel passionately about that you disagree with them on, you may propose in a professional manner, not an emotional manner, propose another solution, another way of doing it. But again, you're asking, you're not telling, because at the end of the day, it is the editor who will have the final say on that. And if you make your case, they may agree with you. If you don't, you may end up having to just go ahead and swallow that pride and do it. Again, they're interested in your success, and they probably have some information that we don't know, and that's why they're making that call on the editing. So again, you want to catch as many of those mistakes. You don't want your editor catching your bad grammar. You want to catch your bad grammar so that the editor is going back and checking only stylization, right? The editor is making sure that I have followed guidelines for my specific type of book, that the voice is strong, that my point of view remains the same throughout the story, so I'm not jumping back and forth between first and third person. My editor is making sure that this is the best possible manuscript. They're not checking me for basic grammatical information. Basic grammar is going to get your story thrown back into the slush pile. So, let's say you're ready to submit. Okay, how do I know where to submit it to? There are plenty of options out there these days. I mentioned earlier there's self-publishing. Self-publishing used to have quite a stigma because people would think, whether it's true or not, they would think that the reason you're self-publishing is because you couldn't get someone to publish your book. That has changed. There are a lot more people self-publishing now. Self-publishing has a lot more quality outlets than it used to have. Sometimes you'll have someone self-publish that a traditional publisher will later discover and decide to go ahead and offer them a contract and purchase that to be republished. You never really know. You have on-demand publishing, where it's a small publisher and they're only publishing what is ordered. Then you also have your traditional publishing houses, your big ones like Random House, and they have a very specific way of doing things. But the industry changes and grows very regularly, and we have to keep up. Once you have your manuscript ready, you need to decide what is the appropriate publishing path for me. One thing I tell people is to ask yourself, are you publishing for yourself because you love this work and you just want it out there? You don't care about making money. You don't care about calling yourself an author. You don't care about making this your full-time job. It's almost like a bucket list thing. I'm doing this because I want to do it. I just want to put this out there and for people to read it. If that's the case and you have some money to invest in it, self-publish. If you are looking for a career as an author, you want to try to go down that traditional path. Okay, people have done both at the same time. One thing I will say is when you're approaching a traditional publisher, if you have self-published before and it's relevant, you can always throw this out there. As you know, I've published similar books of a similar demographic myself, but if you have inundated the market with your own self-published books, you don't necessarily want to tell a traditional publisher that. Like, they need to see that you're willing and ready to put in the work to go through their format and their channels, because overdoing the self-publishing almost means, or almost represents, that you don't really want to follow their path. So you want to be a little careful with that. But again, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I publishing this? Is it just important to me that it's out there and I want it quick and I don't mind spending the money, and I want to have a say in my illustrations, I want to have a say in my editing, I want to have a say in my book design. I want to retain all the rights to my work. If you want to be the umbrella over every facet of publishing this book, then maybe self-publishing is right for you. If you want to go the traditional route, if you want to be an author that lives from being an author, doing school visits, etc., you may want to go the traditional route. It is very difficult, it is time-consuming, but it is doable. Now, please make sure that you've evaluated this, because when you self-publish, again, you are investing your own money. If you are approaching a publisher, you should not be giving any money out of your own pocket. A traditional publisher does not ask you to invest in your book. That is their job to do. So be very careful with some of these wishy-washy middle grade publishers that might want to ask you to put in. If it's a traditional professional publisher, you do not invest. They are investing in you. And as they're investing in you, they expect you to take their word and their advice and their regulations very seriously. Again, the choice is yours. With a traditional publisher, you don't have as much of a say regarding illustrator or illustrations. The publisher chooses your illustrator for you. The publisher tells them everything they need to know about the design. They have book designers. The publisher is going to do all of that, because once you've handed in that edited story and it goes to formatting, you are not going to know what happens until it's ready, and you're just going to pray that they put you in touch with a wonderful illustrator, and you have a very happy surprise. Take a look at the illustrators used by publishers you're interested in, because your illustrator with a picture book especially can make or break your book. So just keep that in mind. Do you want to control it, or are you willing to hand over control? So make sure you've looked at both of those. Follow the submission guidelines. I cannot be more clear on this. Not following submission guidelines, you could be the most incredible, you could be the next J.K. Rowling. Your work will not get looked at if you don't follow submission guidelines. This varies from different publishers. So go to that specific publisher's website and follow their submission guidelines to a T. That's your best chance in getting your work looked at. They're going to tell you it could take 3 to 6 months to get back to you. Okay, don't contact and bug them before that time has elapsed, because that's part of their guidelines. They have many, many, many stories coming in every day. They need to establish how it's going to proceed, and if you comply, you have great chances, and if you don't, you're going to get left in that slush pile. So let's take a look real fast, and we're about to go ahead and stop for time. When you're submitting, if they ask for a query letter, make it short, make it sweet, make it professional. Okay, describe relevant experience. If it's not related, don't include it. Exciting story, and a lot of that exciting story comes from your elevator sale. So that's your real quick description, your action-packed description of what your book is about. Make sure you know your genres, that you know what type of book this is that you have. Do you have a historical fiction, or do you have realistic fiction, or do you have science fiction? Okay, because that's part of your descriptor, to give your publisher an idea of what you're writing about, and also when you tell people about your book, so they know what you're writing about, what to expect. Picture books. This is a big, big one. A lot of time the publisher will list target word counts. You must stick to this, and it's a lot shorter than you think. Okay, 500 to 800 words is typical. Unless they say otherwise in the guidelines, you want to stick to the most concise, action-packed story possible, told in a brief, fun way. Younger grades, you're going to have an even shorter book. This is really hard to do, but you have to trim the fat or your book goes in the slush pile. Middle grade can be a little bit longer. It's for kids transitioning to chapter books. But again, you want to keep it short and sweet and concise to keep your readers interested and to go along with what your editor is going to demand of you. And young adults, again, that can emerge into an even greater length of a novel and approach complex situations that kids of this age range are facing. So know your audience, know who you are submitting to. Best thing you can do your research. What publisher publishes stories like the ones I've written? Make sure there's not one already out there that's almost exactly like you've written. Don't even bother submitting to publishers that only publish things that are drastically different than yours. It's not going to happen. Okay, you want to find that right home for your manuscript. So go to Barnes & Noble, take a look, go to the library, look at everything. What publisher seems like they would embrace what I'm offering? And that's who you go with, following their guidelines. And make sure you've got that brief elevator sales pitch, that real quick paragraph or a sentence. What happens in my story and why should you read it? And go with this guideline. A joke that needs to be explained isn't funny, right? If your description is short and sweet, but it just doesn't work or make sense or engage, you got to work on your sales pitch a little bit better, because you will get asked everywhere you go when you market how to do that. So here's my book. One thing you need to know as an author, once your story is out, you have to be prepared to learn about marketing. That was a hit the ground running thing with me. So go to events, network, do as much as you can to learn as much as you can, because you never know how that information will serve you in the future for future opportunities. Being an author is about writing, and these days it's also about marketing and sales. So educate yourself in that way as well. Go to Barnes & Noble. Offer to do things for free in the beginning. Go to independent bookstores, festivals, submit to awards and grants. Get your name out there. And again, if you can, or if you have another organization you're interested in, networking, being in the know, finding out being abreast of all these new events and opportunities, the easiest way to do that is to get active as an author. So look up SPBWI or another local organization you've found, but if you're writing for children, I highly recommend this one. And if you're interested in the book, my book again is available at Barnes & Noble online, Amazon, direct through me. You can check out my Facebook page on Goodreads. My information is here for anyone who's interested. I'd be more than happy to meet you, to talk to you, to take your questions, to come out and do some fun presentations. It's all up to you. I hope I have covered what you guys wanted to know. I think it's about time to take some questions. So Desiree, if you want to chime back in.
Okay, thank you so much,
Let me see if
Kenna.
she's got me.
Hey.
Hey. All right, would you like me to look at?
Okay, thank you so much, Kenna. Okay, so I do have about 5 or 6 questions um that came in through the chat box. First I want to tell everybody thank you for coming, and that the evaluation is under where it says web links to. You can just click evaluation and then click browse to, or you can go to educatoralexander.com/evaluation. Okay, Kenna, first question. Do you have any advice for writing high-low books?
For high-low books? Okay, I see the question now. I'm sorry, I'm having some audio problems. High-low books. Well, I think the best thing you can do, you want that high interest and a low reading level. That's what high-low is referring to. Take a look at what we said again about passive and active voice. You can write for that lower level if you're using choice words. So you're not going to have as many words. It's going to be a lot more shorter and concise. High impact words are going to be key, and of course you're not going to use high level words that are over your reader's head, but you want to make sure that those words mean something. So again, instead of, my vase broke, my vase shattered, my vase, now I'm thinking of adult words, I'm talking about this, disintegrated. But word choice is going to be key for that, and it's also going to be the difference between one of these very simple books that doesn't hold your attention and really you're only reading it because of the pictures versus a low-level reader that you want to read. Just because it's low-level doesn't mean it has to be boring. So use word choice for that. Make some lists of some exciting words that still fit that low-level category and refer to those when you're writing it.
All right, thank you, Kenna. The next question is, do you give your student writers a graphic organizer?
I was doing a program called Young Authors Day as a librarian at one of my schools. And so I was helping kids from kinder all the way up through 5th grade. Very, very different in how you approach that. If you are going to use a graphic organizer, when we're talking about a writing focus academically, yes, you must use graphic organizers. When you're talking about creative writing, if you're trying to harvest creative writers, I think your graphic organizer needs to be basic. So yes, I give them one, but it's very basic. It's really only going to entail story elements to where they can clearly see and refer to when they're writing so they don't get lost and just flow on. I refer back to what my problem and my solution was, what my beginning, middle, and end was. It needs to be just like a key to guide them through it, but not something overly detailed, because when you're talking about the creative process, if you map it out too much, you almost lose the joy in it, which you want to maintain. So they need to have something simple, clear, and concise they can refer back to in the upper grades for creative writing, but you don't want to kill them with the details in the map. You want those details to be killer in the story. When it comes to the younger students, kindergartners we wrote as a class. I didn't give them a graphic organizer because I wanted them to focus on telling me the story instead of trying to figure out this writing map. And I simply had a list: characters, setting, problem, solution. And we would list it, and then we would refer back to it as I wrote out what they told me, guiding them through the story. So it really depends on the age, and it depends on your purpose. If you're looking for an academic piece, yes, they need to be able to follow their own story. If you're looking for creativity, I would say that's a very good starting point to keep them focused and organized, but you don't want them to spend more time mapping the story out than they do actually writing it. The focus should be the writing.
Okay, thank you for that, Kenna.
Desiree, did you want me to look at the next? Oh, there we go.
Okay, next, what books do you recommend for classroom teachers for writing?
This is going to sound bad, perhaps, but I think if you want to foster writers, the key is not necessarily having books for classroom teachers, it's having books in your classroom that inspire. I know that's terrible, but I'm a librarian, and what influences kids to write the most is being exposed as much as possible to wonderful, brilliant literature that makes them want to write. There is a book, and I'm sorry I don't know the author off the top of my head, but Words Their Way gives you a lot of great ideas if you want to take a look at that one, as far as your professional library is concerned. But I think if you want to enhance creativity, make sure that the environment remains creative and open. I think a lot of what we are doing in education recently is narrowing down the options students have as far as creative thinking, and we want to make sure those stay ample and as open as possible so they continue to think outside the box.
All right, thanks, Kenna. Next, how do you get an editor if you self-publish?
Okay, that's a great question, because you don't necessarily have to have an editor when you self-publish. You can be your own editor. Again, you're going to have to be harsh on yourself, and I would still strongly suggest having a second pair of eyes look, just to make sure there's nothing you've missed. So you can always go completely on your own. If you want an editor, be prepared to. If you want a professional editor, you have to pay because they're professional. So be prepared to spend a little money to hire someone to give a very thorough look at your work. Now, you want to make sure that if you're paying someone, that they are of professional quality. And again, I have to refer back to the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. They have a great list of resources for anything you can think of, which includes editors. You can get up-to-date lists on editors, on awards, on fellowships, anything you can think of, and they ensure that all of the lists and information contained in their lists is relevant, good information. You definitely don't want to find an editor on Craigslist. Another thing you can do, if you know somebody who is published, they may not necessarily be an editor, but if they're published, that should mean that they've gone through the editing process and they know through their experience what an editor typically looks for and what an editor typically is going to want you to change. So you can always go through that route as well. But you want to make sure this person, again, just like your critics, you want to make sure that they have experience, related experience, and they know what they're talking about. But I would refer, even if you don't become a member, that you contact a writing organization and ask for some referrals to editors that can work freelance.
Okay, the next question is about when you are using a publisher, a traditional publisher, does it become more of their book than yours?
Wow, that is an excellent question, and it is a very multi-pronged one. um, as the author, your book is your baby, yes, but it's like when a village raises a child. Once you've involved that village, that traditional publisher, it's now the village raising your child with you. So you gave birth to this book baby, but now the village is going to have a lot of input and authority, including rights to your book. So you do lose a lot of power in that. However, you gain power in other ways because you have a professional publishing name behind you that you can use as a reference. It gives you more credibility. But don't go into it expecting to have a whole lot of say. I will say I really don't think that a traditional publisher is going to set themselves up for failure by not doing their best to get you a great illustrator. Now, they may pick somebody whose style is different than what you imagined, but it could be that this person's style really embodies your story even better. They're not going to get, some editor, an English major that hasn't graduated out of college to be your editor, because they have invested money in getting your book out there and they want to make sure that they make that money back. So yes, you lose power, you lose authority, sure, but you're gaining a lot as well. You're gaining a lot of reputability, and you're gaining the expertise for many years and generations that that publisher has been around. So you got to look at it that way. Now, a key point in this is looking at your contract. When you're offered the contract, make sure you read it. Don't ever sign a contract without reading it, because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. All of those details that might come back later and you say, oops, were right there in your contract. You're agreeing to those terms when you sign the contract. So, for example, the rights, like giving away your baby, you need to look at your contract and see what rights do I retain as the author, or once this contract has expired, do I get the rights back as the author, or does the publisher still maintain the rights? So during that contract phase is when you have a little room to negotiate. You don't want to bully your weight around too much, because why would a publisher want to work with someone who's not cooperative? Again, they're trying to make money too, so most of the time what they're going to do is going to be in your best interest. But when you have that contract in front of you, if there's something that you're vehemently against, that is the time where you ask the question, is this piece negotiable right here? That's the time when you can ask, will I have any say in who my illustrator or editor is? That's when all those important questions need to get asked before you sign. That way, even if they won't budge, you're fully aware of what you're getting yourself into.
Okay, Kenna, we have one more question. If you have any other questions, please type them into the chat box. The last question I have right now is, do you set aside a certain time to write, or do you just write when you're inspired by an event?
A great, very good question. As silly as that is, this is to say, before I had two little boys at home, I sat down to write with the full intention of writing. And like I mentioned in the beginning, if the lightning wasn't there, I'd kind of work through some stories, or I'd go back and like revisit some stories and try to make them better. I put writing in my schedule. The way my life is now, that's not as easy to do, and I'm sure a lot of you can identify with the full-time job, and I freelance and I visit libraries and I promote my book, and then I have kids. It's really hard to just sit down and write now. So I'm the queen of multitasking at this point. I carry my spiral notebook around in my purse, and I jot my ideas down, and when that idea hits me, I will, if I have to, go to Barnes& and Noble, sit down and just write, go to Starbucks, sit down and write, or I'll wait till the kids are busy and I have a downtime. But I have to, the way I work, I have to get it out when it's fresh and when I'm excited about it. Because if I wait too long, I forget some of the details that got me excited about the story, or it doesn't come out in the same passionate way. So even if it's me kind of half scribbling incoherently on the paper, I get it out when that lightning strikes as best as I can, and then I sit down and I write. A good thing to do, sounds like kind of a sacrifice, but especially if you have kids at home, wake up 20 minutes earlier before they're up on the weekends and sit down and write. Or once they go to bed, sit down and write. Like, give yourself that regular practice time. I will say for me, it's harder to do that with the creative aspect of it, but I'm very disciplined when it comes to articles. Like I said, my heart, I enjoy it, but it's not my heart and soul in it. So I can sit down when I'm not inspired and whip out that article that's due 3 days later. That you can schedule in. If you're writing for that type of demographic and audience, you can schedule time very easily because it doesn't require that lightning strike. The rest, carry something with you. It could be a tiny notebook, but whenever you feel that inspiration or you notice that thing that says that would be a fascinating character, or, ooh, I can't believe this thing just happened, scribble it down in that notebook, because even if you don't have time then and you don't have a scheduled writing time, when you do sit down, you'll still have it. You have to take advantage of the inspiration while it's there before you forget.
Okay, guys, so if you have any other questions, you can please type it in to the chat box, but we are going to go ahead and wrap up this webinar. Please make sure you have signed in. That is how you get your certificate. And if you are a part of AIE, that is how you get your credit. So please make sure you have signed in. The link is right there under web links. And then make sure you have done an evaluation to let us know how you like this. I see some really great comments coming in to the chat box for Kenna. Kenna, that was amazing. I know you have actually helped people follow their dreams today with publishing. So we appreciate you greatly. Let's see, I think I may have. Okay, no. Okay, well, we are done here. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Kenna's mic so she can say goodbye. And thank you all for attending.
Great, thank you so much, everybody. And if you, sorry, I got logged out again. Thank you so much for attending. And if you have any questions, if you want me to come out to a school, if you just want to talk about writing, if you're interested in the book or interested in how to do more, all my information is right there. You're more than welcome to email me, call, send me a message. Whatever floats your boat, I am open in here and here to help each other grow. So thank you so much, and I hope you'll be reading my book soon, and I hope one day I'll be reading yours too. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenna. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close out the room. Please make sure that you have the sign-in link, which is educatoralexander.com/sign-in/sign-in. And then you have the evaluation of educatoralexander.com/evaluation. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.